Oh, the hook is even appropriate. It's the Ursula hook. Hey, hi, hello. I'm Steph, chef, and this is Crochet and Creepy, where I tell you something creepy and make you something cute. So today, while I regale you with tales of the creepy, on my hook I have the very beginnings of a cloak. And I'm doing it in the shell stitch, which is quite apropos. So this stitch involves me having to count in my head, so if I sort of zone out for a second, I'm counting. Oh boy, it's ghost ship time! Today I'm going to tell you the maritime mystery of the Mary Celeste. I love ghost stories, I love ocean lore, I love being at sea, so needless to say, I am pretty excited to tell you this tale today. So I'm going to take you back to the very best place to start a story, the beginning. So the ship was built in Nova Scotia, Canada in 1861 using real Canadian trees. The ship was named the Amazon, and the first captain she had was a man named Robert McClellan. From the get-go, it seemed that the ship was cursed. Maybe the builders disturbed the tree spirits. For the Amazon's maiden voyage, the ship left Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia in June of 1861 and headed to Five Islands, Nova Scotia, which wasn't very far away. The plan from there was to load up with timber to take across the Atlantic to London. But once the cargo was loaded, Captain McClellan actually ended up catching pneumonia. The crew decided to try to make it back to Spencer's Island, but before they made it there, the captain died on the ship. After that, a man named John Nutting Parker was named captain of the Amazon, and the ship set out for London once more. They had a couple of mishaps on that trip that sound to me more like their human error than anything supernatural. For example, off of the coast of Maine, they ran into some fishing equipment, and then once they were in the English Channel, they actually hit another ship and caused that ship to sink. Those events kind of get lumped into Mary Celeste's spooky history, but I think it kind of sounds like Captain Parker was hitting the rum a little too hard. He only remained in command for 2 years, probably because he wasn't that great of a captain, and after him, a man named William Thompson took over. Under Captain Thompson, things were pretty chill. The Amazon was able to travel through the West Indies, England, and the Mediterranean with no notable problems. Then, in 1867, the Amazon hit a storm that was so bad it ran aground. It was pretty heavily damaged, so the owners considered it a wreck and ended up selling it for cheap. The Amazon ended up in the possession of a man named Richard Haynes. He bought the ship at a low price and put a lot of money into repairing it. He also did a very bad thing, according to superstition. He renamed the ship Mary Celeste. The superstition goes that it is very bad luck to rename a ship, but if you must do it, then you have to perform a renaming ceremony. So clearly, either Haynes didn't have a renaming ceremony at all, or the one he did was not up to par. People Haynes owed money to ended up repossessing the Mary Celeste, and she was sold to another group of people that was headed by a man named James Winchester. In 1872, they had the Mary Celeste upgraded. They pretty much just made her bigger all around. After that, they chose a new captain for her, and that was a man named Benjamin Spooner Briggs. So Ben had grown up around the sea. His dad was a captain, 2 of his brothers were also sea captains, so the salt was in his blood. No, that would be bad for your arteries. So the sea was in his blood. Ben had a wife, Sarah, and they had 2 children together, Arthur and Sophia. Sophia was 5 years younger than Arthur. So the first trip Mary Celeste was supposed to take after she'd been all hulked out was from New York to Genoa, Italy, and she was going to be loaded with 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. I definitely had to look up what that meant, and it's just ethanol that has additives in it that makes it so you can't drink it. So it makes it poisonous and really bad tasting and smelling. Denatured alcohol is usually used as fuel for alcohol burners and camping stoves. It is pretty flammable and dangerous, but Captain Briggs had a lot of experience. The sea was in his blood! So he wasn't worried about it. So for the voyage, Captain Briggs handpicked his crew of 7 men, and he also decided to bring along his wife and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. He left his son Arthur at home with his grandmother because Arthur had to go to school. So on November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste hit the open ocean, and that was the last time that anyone ever heard from or saw that crew again. Fast forward to December 4th of 1872, a couple hundred miles off of the coast of Portugal. A ship called the Dei Gratia, captained by David Morehouse, saw another ship moving erratically. They sailed closer to try to see what was going on, and they tried to send signals to the crew of the strange ship, but nobody would answer them. So they got even closer and couldn't see anyone on deck, so Captain Morehouse sent a boarding party over to the ship to try to figure out what had happened. The sailors reported back that the ship was in fact the Mary Celeste, that there was absolutely nobody aboard. It seemed like their whole crew had just vanished somehow. They also said that there was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, which is a fair amount but wouldn't sink the ship, and also that the sails were in pretty bad condition, but they could still work. Most of the passengers' possessions were still on board Mary Celeste, as was most of the food that they had. The cargo, the alcohol, the barrels were still pretty much all intact except for just a few which were cracked. Mary Celeste's lifeboat was missing, though, along with the captain's navigational instruments and the ship's papers. Captain Morehouse decided to try to bring the Mary Celeste into port at Gibraltar. He decided to do this because he wanted to salvage it. He did that because, according to maritime law back then, if you saved a derelict ship like that, you could then be entitled to part of the ship's worth as well as the cargo that it was holding. So he sent half of his crew over to sail the Mary Celeste, and the rest of them stayed on the Dei Gratia. Gonna changing the colors. Ow! Slowly but surely, the two ships made their way to Gibraltar. But once they got there, in order to get paid anything, they had to prove that there hadn't been any foul play aboard the Mary Celeste. So they had to go to salvage court. The guy in charge there was a man named Frederick Solly Flood, and apparently he was more on the stubborn side, and he had for some reason decided in his mind already that the Dei Gratia was not as innocent in the matter as they seemed. At the time, it was rumored that the crew of the Dei Gratia had somehow gotten rid of Mary Celeste's crew in order for them to get a hold of that denatured alcohol. But this theory seems pretty fishy, suspicious to me. The Dei Gratia had followed pretty much the same route as the Mary Celeste had, and they had left 8 days after Mary Celeste had left. So it seems pretty unlikely that they would have been able to catch up to Mary Celeste, let alone pass her in order to ambush her. Hello. Since Flood was never able to find any evidence of foul play, the Dei Gratia crew was cleared and paid. However, they were paid a much lower rate than anyone expected them to be paid, which kept the rumor mill alive. There are, of course, a few other theories about what happened to the Mary Celeste's crew, one of which involves a cryptid. I think you know, in this house, we love a cryptid. I came very well for the cryptid part of this story with a t-shirt, my Ursula hook, my Seize the Day mug. Anyway, it was posited that the missing crew could have been the work of the mighty Kraken. The Kraken could have used its many tentacles to pull over the 10 unlucky crew members into the depths of the sea. But of course, the Kraken would have no use for a lifeboat, the missing instruments, or the ship's papers, unless it was an intelligent Kraken who took those items in order to throw humans off the scent. Another theory that popped up was that the Mary Celeste was raided by pirates, but that doesn't seem very likely either because of all the stuff that was left on board. Pirates definitely would have looted the ship and not left it in the condition it was left in. Another theory takes into account those cracked barrels of alcohol, and it suggests that the crew got really desperate for a drink and cracked open the barrels and got drunk and then went crazy and got rid of the rest of the crew and escaped on a lifeboat. However, this does not make any sense either because that alcohol was not for drinking and would have been absolutely terrible. Even if they had gotten into it and drank it, it's more likely that they would have just died from drinking it right there on the ship. And of course, there is an alien theory, and I promise one day I will go into an alien theory, but today is not that day. I remember one time I was watching something with my dad about how aliens were stealing cows or murdering cows on a ranch somewhere. Maybe I'll look into that one day. So the last theory I'll tell you about also takes the alcohol into account. It was thought that somehow those barrels cracked and the alcohol started leaking out. The crew members were able to smell the fumes from the barrels, and then they got scared because it was super flammable and dangerous. So maybe then Captain Briggs decided to have everybody pile onto that lifeboat so that maybe they could wait the fumes out and get back on the boat when it was safe again. And then, of course, once they all got into the lifeboat, somehow they got separated. Either the rope broke or they forgot to bring over a rope, and the Mary Celeste sailed away from them, basically. I'm not too sure if that theory makes a whole lot of sense because I'm not a captain yet. But I do think it seems like something scared them into that lifeboat, but something that they thought was temporary since they didn't really bring any food with them. They didn't bring their possessions. They kind of just had some navigation and the ship's papers, and that was kind of it. Maybe they saw those tree spirits one night and decided that they had to sleep in the lifeboat to wait them out. Who knows? So I guess the moral of the story here, and my personal takeaway, is that if you build a boat, don't piss off any tree spirits, and if you name your boat, stick with that name or Poseidon will send the Kraken after you. So Mary Celeste's story doesn't quite end there. After Gibraltar, she ended up back in New York, where she just sat in a harbor for a couple of years because everyone thought she was cursed. Are they wrong? They're not wrong. In February of 1874, Winchester and his bunch sold the Mary Celeste to a new group of people. Under their management, she sailed around the West Indies and the Indian Ocean a bunch, but they frequently lost money on her. In 1879, another captain of hers became ill and died, making that the third captain to die a premature death on the Mary Celeste. The ship changed hands a few more times before finally landing Gilman Parker as her captain. As you may recall, Mary Celeste does not have the best of luck with captains named Captain Parker. So this Captain Parker came up with an insurance fraud scheme and deliberately crashed Mary Celeste into a reef off of the coast of Haiti in order to collect insurance money. And that, my friends, is where her tale finally comes to an end. She was wrecked there and sank, either freeing those poor tree spirits or carrying them down to a watery grave with her. Thanks for hanging out with me again today. I had a lot of fun telling you that story. This is how far I got today on this little guy. It will be a cloak one day, you'll see. As always, I will link my Etsy shop down below. I have a couple cool sweaters and beanies that you can check out and maybe buy for yourself or somebody else. I don't know. Do whatever you want. On your way out, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. See what I did there? Yeah? Okay, bye!